Hi there, it's Hannah and I'm going to talk to you today about our brain anatomy kit. This is really useful for discussing the different regions of the primate brain and the different functions each of those regions play. It's also a good chance to discuss how the connections between the regions are vital to brain function. The version you can see in front of me is built to full scale, but we default to printing a half-scale brain, as you can see here on the website. It works as a three-dimensional puzzle where the students can assemble the lobes together into a single half of the brain. Now, while you're doing this, it's a really good chance to talk about the four major parts of the brain: the cerebrum, the diencephalon, the brainstem, and the cerebellum. And so, depending on the complexity and the level of your students, you can either increase the complexity or decrease it accordingly. So each of the brain parts are here. We have the temporal lobe, the occipital lobe, the cerebellum, parietal lobe, the hippocampus, the brainstem, the limbic system, the limbic lobe, and the frontal lobe. So the very first thing you need to do to start assembling them is to de-support them. To do that, simply use pliers and break all of the supports off the bottom of the model. You'll also want to be sure to remove any of the supports that are on the inside of the pieces. You'll find a couple of supports on different lobes that are actually within these little hexagonal openings. Those are peg slots that we use together to combine the model, so you need to make sure that those are clear and empty. And then while you're de-supporting, make sure that you don't unintentionally de-support and break off any of the pegs themselves, as those will be what we use to connect the different lobes together when assembling the puzzle. Once it's de-supported, you're ready to start putting it together. First, we're going to connect the hippocampus to the brainstem by sort of just sliding it around like that to where the small piece rests along this curve at the top of the brainstem. Then, rotate the two into the limbic lobe. Next, you take the parietal lobe and you look for this bumpy side here, and it goes around the outside. This slides right in from the back where you can see the curved shape along the front matches. Then you take the frontal lobe and it connects right in, sliding in from the side. This one's got a number of pegs, so make sure you're lining up all the pegs, and when you get them in place, it all just sort of clicks into place. Now set that aside and assemble the occipital lobe and the cerebellum. What you're looking for is this one edge where the two curves line up. It's along this side of the occipital lobe there, and you've got the peg here from the cerebellum that goes in and then slides right into place there. Next, you can assemble both of these onto the main brain, and you do that by connecting them so that the flat side here is all the inside half of the brain, and you just line up the pegs on the outside. There's a peg here on the back of the cerebellum that goes into the brainstem. And then, since it's still a little bit wobbly, the last piece is going to lock it all in place, and that's our temporal lobe. That one comes in from the bottom, and you line up all the pegs there. And now you have a complete brain model ready to go that you can actually move around freely and not be worried about it falling apart. One thing you're going to want to do is let the students know that although they are very distinct in this kit because they are separate pieces that print, in a real brain, the different lobes work together. It's not as clear-cut as in this model, but it does give the students a good chance to visually understand some of the anatomy of the brain. And then from there, you can start advancing into different areas as to how they're used, what the different systems do. You can talk about the exterior of the cerebrum, the cerebral cortex. You can talk about how the interior of the cerebrum has the limbic system and the hippocampus. The diencephalon is a part of that. And then you can discuss the role of the brainstem and the cerebellum and how each of these different parts of the brain have different functions. So we hope you enjoy it. Thanks for listening and have a great